I'm having trouble controlling myself here. We're just very excited, and she's been so gracious, and she said, "Absolutely, come on, let's go." And but she just did this huge monumental. She does actually. If you read, Jamie did another outstanding job of doing research. If you read all the stuff this woman has done in her life, it's no surprise that she's where she is, because she's done about everything. We're going to refer to her as Dr.Lori. That's a nickname the firemen gave her because it was easy for them to remember. And we're just going to kick around. There's 6 big topics that came out of the summit that was held at the Fire Academy, or the Emergency Training Center. And I will tell you, if you, so there's a copy of that report in the chat room. That's number one. Number two, if you look back a couple weeks or a couple months, last month, Jeff Morissette, as always on top of the ball, had sent it out to everybody as an attachment to one of the listservs. Now, if you get your camera thing out and hit that QR code, you can actually watch the, I call it testimony, but the presentations that were done as part of the summit. And I got to tell you something. There was I learned some stuff that I never thought of. And I'll give you it makes so much sense, but we would have never thought about that. We've talked about cancer rates and everything else. There's a real big problem following female firefighters with cancer. It's not enough of them. There's no bulk. There's no quantity to actually see a whole lot of movement or be able to package. So it's some of those things they talked about were actually very, very interesting, is that it's not stuff you would normally think about. So that was pretty good. So Dr. Lori, would you just do me a favor? I know you've had it, you're primarily, I shouldn't say that, it's not right. You have had a big analytical data background. Can you just go for a couple of minutes and give us the highlights of where you came from and, you know, and that kind of stuff for us to bring so everybody's up on the same page?
I'd be happy to. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Lori Moore-Merrell, and I'm your U.S. Fire Administrator. So I want to thank you for having me here. So really excited to be able to spend a little time with you this evening. I appreciate the time. So yeah, I went on the job. I grew up in Tennessee, first of all, in Nashville, but I went on the job in Memphis, Tennessee in 1987. So nobody start counting now to see how long that's been. But I went on the job back in 1987. I was the 6th woman hired in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Fire Department. In fact, the chief of Memphis right now, I trained her in recruit school. So I was actually instructing in the recruit school when she came on. So that's my legacy there. But I stayed on the job about 7 years before being recruited to the IAFF. And so in 1993, late 1993, I was recruited over to be the EMS specialist at the IAFF. And that was a time when we were really starting to take hold really of fire-based EMS and see where we are now, right? That is the majority of what we do throughout the country is emergency medicine. And so I went into the IAFF. I spent 26 and a half years there and ended up doing quite a bit of research, particularly in the operations spectrum, looking at crew size, looking at deployment. And so a lot of what is in particularly the NFPA 1710 standard, a lot of what we do in that the space of effective response force, a lot of what we do with standards of cover. So that was sort of what I ended up doing with a lot of research at the IAFF. And then I retired from there in 2019, just before COVID, and started the International Public Safety Data Institute, which took over the Fire Cares Project and the NFORS project back then that had been sort of driven by a team approach with NIST. You guys are familiar, I'm sure, with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. And so we've done a lot of collaboration with NIST over the years and a number of other organizations as well. And so IPSDI was established and became really the leader in fire service data. And then when President Biden was elected, he asked me to serve on the transition committee. And so I was part of the Biden-Harris transition team and dealt primarily with inside FEMA. The COVID cell is what we were called, the COVID team. And the fire administration, of course, sits inside FEMA. And so I also reviewed back then the fire administration as part of the transition. And so after that, I was tapped to come in as the fire administrator. And so I was actually received my commission in October of 21. So I've been here just going on a year and a half at this point. Wow. And so trying to shake it up here a bit, but that's my path.
And you've been busy.
Yes.
In a short period.
Yes, we have.
I think one of our guys, John Oates, did he go into where you were?
He did. He became the CEO, took my seat over at IPSDI and is doing a great job there.
I listened to him do his presentation, and he did a really good job. And he could actually put out a fire in a phone booth with a hose wag. It's a John Oates joke. He'll understand it. So what do you think has been your biggest challenge?
Wow, that's a great question. Since coming in here, the biggest challenge, I can tell you that when I arrived, the first thought that I had after about a month here was, what was I thinking, taking this on, right? But it's a worthwhile venture because the USFA, as probably, I'm probably speaking to the choir here, the USFA had really become quite irrelevant to the fire service as a whole. We have national organizations that were leaning forward and doing a lot of the things that really the USFA should be leading. And so I knew that from the outside. I knew it when I was coming in, but it became much more evident once on the inside. And so the biggest thing I wanted to do is to make USFA relevant, to reestablish it as the leader of the fire service across the US. And I tapped all of our national organizations to come along, stand with me to raise this entity up, because if we can elevate the USFA, particularly inside government, then you begin to get a lot more attention on the fire service at large. And so we did that. That was really the one of the biggest challenges, and why we did the summit that you mentioned just a few minutes ago. We looked at, as you do when you enter a new organization, one of the first things that you should do as a leader is assess how it became what it was, what it's supposed to be, has it straight from the track, or is it on track, right? And so I went back and looked at all of the legislation that surrounded the USFA. We were actually established, there was a fire prevention and control conference held in 1947, right? By President Truman.
Truman, yep.
Yes, and so after that, that spawned the 1973 America Burning Report, which then sort of spawned the legislation that created the USFA. Well, given that, then the USFA had some tasks in that legislation. And I went back and I looked at those, what we're supposed to be doing. And frankly, I'll be very frank with this group, we weren't doing the majority of them. USFA was not doing what it was supposed to be doing. One of them was an annual conference. We're supposed to be, since 1974, hosting an annual conference on fire prevention and control, and it had never been done. And so I said, well, that's we're going to do this. And so we did. In October, we held that summit, and we're going to be doing that every October, doing Fire Prevention Week. And nice. So we'll start to expand that by invitation. It was by invitation only this time. We'll start to look at how better to do that. But as you know, what came out of that was this national strategy. And another effort that I think is even bigger than our task, even though they're quite large, the national strategy, is the fire service coming together. I had people, if you all watched it at all, if you haven't, please go back and check it out as you suggested. Every head of the major organizations came together, sat at the same table, and spoke about a fire service issue, but they didn't speak for their organization. They spoke for the whole of the fire service. And that's huge, because that's how we get movement. If we stand together, and not just as the IFC or the IAFF or the NVFC or NFPA, but we stand as the whole of the fire service, then we can move things. We can make a difference. We can have an impact. And so that's what everyone has decided to do. and it's called the Fire Service One Voice. If you haven't seen that on social media, that's a hashtag we started tagging. Everybody is using it. So any social media that you do, everybody's supposed to end it with hashtag Fire Service One Voice. And so we are collaborating in ways that we have never done before in that space. And that's an important piece. So I think that the question was, what was the biggest thing facing me? I think it's that we've got the data system that is no small feat that I'm happy to talk about as well. The Infers data system, which is, as you all know, I don't have to tell anybody it's problematic. It's beyond problematic. So we are definitely going to be making changes in the data system. And by changes, I mean standing up a new one and a cloud-based system, an analytics platform that's very powerful. And we'll be by 2025 decommissioning and shutting down the old Infers system. So in the next 2 years, you're going to see us stand up a new fire service data system.
So a month ago, as a matter of fact, we had the leaders of we call them the 5 families or 7 families in the state here having this conversation about the next legislative session and the 3 things that they think are important. And again, that whole conversation was one band, one voice, right? One sound, right? We're all going to say this. We're not going to, if something else opportunity pops up, that's fine, but we're not going to sacrifice the big deals that we're looking on for these little things. We're not going to talk bad about it, but when it comes to the group, so that kind of makes me feel good that in our state, those leaders have gotten together to kind of head down that path.
Yeah, that's excellent. That's great to hear.
I should also mention that we have students from the Springfield Technological Community College here tonight with their instructor, Chief Pete Bonomi. They will be tuning in as we go. All right, so let's walk down let's talk about the 6 priorities. And I'm just gonna read them out rather than try to paraphrase them. Prepare all firefighters for the climate-driven increase in wildland in the wildland urban interstates, WUI, something I learned today, by providing them with the proper training and equipment. So my being a community risk reduction guy, my thought process is we start at the beginning before we have the emergency, right? And I'm not positive when it comes to the urban wildland interface that we're there. I mean, we've had some kids in my class. The fire department brings a chipper around on the first Saturday of the month and chips up all your brush for you. You drag it to the street. They chip it up because it was in Colorado. And so let's get rid of the stuff that'll burn, right? So there were some things, but I don't know if, what was the thought process with the group as to where that was going to go?
That's an excellent question. So yes, that's the first of the national strategy efforts. And so preparing us in the structural environment for wildfire. And I want to be very purposeful in what I say, because one of the things that we keep encountering is people talking about wildland fire. Wildland fire, and that is what Congress knows. That's what even the president speaks about it that way. We all talk about wildland fire, which that's what they say, but what they mean is interface fire, because trees often burn. We've seen the forest burn for 100 years, hundreds of years, right? And in fact, that's what propitiates the forest.
Yeah.
So having vegetation burn in the wildland is not that big a problem. When it becomes problematic is when it encroaches now on where we have cleared vegetation and put built environment. We put homes, we put businesses. We have people living in what used to burn on purpose. It's a very fire-prone geography, and yet we put homes there and expect it's not going to burn. And this is something that we have to talk about, because now this is a different type location. It used to be wildland. It's no longer wildland. It is now what we call the interface or the intermix or all the way into suburbia, right? Because we have these locations. Wildland's a location, interface is a location, intermix is a location or type of community. And then of course, suburban and urban. Wildfire is the entity we're dealing with. And so we have to speak about this differently, because if we don't, then we still are getting resources sent to the, all resources are going to one place, over to forestry, U.S. Forest Service, over to the Interior, Department of Interior. FEMA gets money to clean up the mess after a big disaster, a fire. And we in this structured fire environment are not getting the resources we need to prepare for this. That's our PPE and training. So in this national strategy, what we're talking about is making sure that we are training all structural firefighters, urban, rural, suburban, all of them, tribal, territorial, everybody, in the interface firefighting strategies and tactics. What that means is it's not just one structure fire you pull up, you know what to do, right? We could launch an interior attack, or we go in defensive strategy, whatever it is, on a single structure. But when you pull up in an area where the entire cul-de-sac is on fire, or you pull into an area where there's 100 structures burning, now what strategies and tactics do you use? And so I'll give you the example. This was happened, and I'm going to quote a chief from Boston Fire. There was a battalion chief who was asked, Boston was asked to send 100 firefighters to help in a suburban community outside their jurisdiction. Could you come and help us? We've got a wildfire, right? They sent the engines, trucks over. They all start pulling in and doing what they do. They pull down the street. They start hooking to hydrants and flowing water. Well, what do they don't know what they're doing, right? In fact, the chief says, we didn't know what we were doing, but I know what we were doing was wrong. And that is very telling. And if I'm talking about Boston, one of the major urban centers, right? It's all urban.
Yeah.
We have to look at these communities, because every structural firefighter may not be in your community, but it may be in your neighboring community, or you're called to cover, or you're called to help. Everybody's got to be trained in these different strategies and tactics when there are multiple structures on fire. And of course, our PPE is still the challenge with breathing apparatus for our wildland system, and even different kinds of SCBA potentially for the interface.
And it's crazy, because you send a city or a municipal engine company into the woods with you, and you'll come off the truck. Everybody's got all their gear on, their helmet, their coat, and they're standing next to a kid who's got the yellow shirt on, a pair of jeans, and some construction shoes, and they're going, "You're going to last about 5 minutes. You need to change." Now, on the other hand, I'm glad you brought up, because if you talk to the respiratory people, taking a bandana, or even one of these fancier ones now that they have, and putting it over your face, you're still sucking a lot of stuff in. And people don't understand that we can still get some of those chemicals out of the woods, right? If you talk to some of the doctors, they don't want you smoking meat, because it's not good. There's acids and toxics and stuff that come out of there. So it can be really, really crazy. One of the things that I think the Forest Service does do well, because unfortunately they've had too much opportunity here to need to do this, is they do a good job of sharing learning lessons. It's pretty amazing that, they're proud when they have a tradition, for lack of a better term, of dying together. Whether it's rolling a van off the side of a hill, a helicopter going down, a flashover, or whatever it might be, they have a tendency to lose a lot of people. When I'm down in October, the thing that breaks my heart is we got this 18-year-olds parents and grandparents are there, or 21-year-olds grandparents and parents are there, and here's this kid died out, and because the wind shifted or something. And you could get it again. You take a city boy and put him out in the country, you can put him in, he can get himself in a bad spot very, very, very quickly.
And that's a different kind of, again, strategies and tactics, appropriate training for the location where you're fighting fire. That's where we have to raise the awareness, because we have great training for structure to wildland, and we have training for wildland to structure. This is not what we're talking about with this strategy. We're talking about fighting fire in the interface when there are multiple structures with little defensive space, because the community may not be what we refer to as fire adapted. We want to see fire adapted communities in this 1/3 now of our population that lives in what we would define as the interface, and yet they have no idea of the risk of fire that they are enduring. And so it is very important too that our firefighters who now are structural firefighters, and because we've now annexed what is now interface, we have to understand how to fight fire in that space. So this is a huge piece and a big piece of understanding that all of the fire service has got to come to grips with.
Oh, absolutely. It kind of segues. The reason a lot of those extra companies are there is because of this question right here, or this point here. Invest in a national apprenticeship program to address the shortage of firefighters and to make the fire service more diverse and more inclusive, right? Out
Yes.
here we have cadets and juniors. In Connecticut, we have an interesting movement, lack of movement, trying to do something with bringing those young folks up. But also in Connecticut, we have a lot of child labor laws, and there's a lot of debate whether even, and we're an OSHA state, so there's a lot of debate there. But let's talk about this from a global picture, because why you're here.
Absolutely. So in that national strategy, we are looking at the recruitment problem across the nation. And this recruitment problem exists with career and volunteer combination. It's across the board. We are seeing numbers that are drastically lower than we normally get for an application period, right? Our recruitment period, where you would have, particularly in our suburban and urban, fire departments, we'd get 2,500 to 3,000 to 5,000, applications when you would have an open application period. They're down to 700, 400, I mean, it is a vast difference in the pool. And so what we're also encountering is not only is the pool smaller, but then trying to identify within that pool people who can, first of all, get through a background check. And then second of all, once they are selected and get through the background and the preparatory vetting, then getting them through recruit school is another challenge. And so understanding that we've got multiple gates into our recruitment process. And how do we need to look at that? Is there another way that we can use, and maybe it's using volunteer departments as feeders for career departments, or maybe it's using community colleges or technical schools and recruiting there and having them do the preliminary EMT schools, for example. And we've got some of these models sort of scattered around the nation that we're trying to identify, put them on some sort of grid so we can start to look at them and say, okay, is that a best practice? And so for each of these strategies, maybe we should have said this up front, but for each of these strategies that we're going to go over, there is a work group that is working that problem. And they're going to be bringing back recommendations to me mid-year. We're going to have a discussion and see what else they need to identify between then and October. And at the summit in October, they'll be delivering out their actionable recommendations for each of these strategies. But this one is a big one.
And the point again, the committees are not single focus. Again, they're a diverse committee.
Correct.
And as a matter of fact, one of the speakers said, because you're handing out applications in a minority community and you have your door open, that's not recruiting. That's just passing around paper. That's not how you recruit. And that doesn't matter whether you're in Philadelphia or out here in East, in a very rural community or suburban community. It's like the advertising and the reaching out has to be just always there.
I think it's more about marketing, isn't it? Rather
Absolutely.
than just post and what we call post and pray. It is more about us marketing the fire service and growing our own candidates in many cases, starting with junior high and explorers, or high school and technical training, or tech school, right? Community colleges, and starting to grow our own recruits and let early on, let kids know that let them see themselves as a firefighter, let them understand this is an option. So I think that's an important piece.
One of our chiefs, Sherry, her point in her group is that we need to be able to have, and it's whether it's male, female, whatever, we need to make sure the students understand, the students are given the ability to learn. The CPAT is a big discussion, is make sure they understand, if you just do this and we'll supply the vests, or you can go to this training center, and we'll host it in the rec department, and whatever it takes to get that. One of the issues we had at our recruit academy was grammar and writing and understanding deductive reasoning. And so their test scores were to the point where they had to retest. That's all front end stuff. You know what I mean? But if you get the sixth grader involved with the fifth grader involved, and you could have extra classes and go to the math class and do hydraulics. I'm speaking to the choir here.
But it may be, you're right, because that may be, maybe it's not just the student, maybe it's our instructors. Maybe we need to change how we teach. Maybe we need to look at more immersive learnings. Maybe we need to figure out how do we get much more hands-on, because most of the generations that we're looking to recruit now learn through visual, they learn through video, they learn through hearing and doing, right? This immersive kind of AR and virtual reality, augmented reality type scenarios mixed with actual practical hands-on. So we need to be really cognizant of how we teach as well.
No, we've seen that, boy, at the academy, the PowerPoint's on its last breath. We just got re-energized. We had a bunch of customers asking us for CPR classes, and now the new CPR classes, you watch a video and then you answer questions, you add a little bit that maybe the video, real life, that the video didn't have, and then you move on. Matter of fact, when they're practicing, you run a video so that if they forget, they can just look up and listen, and then they can get re-engage their brain. Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah.
All right, moving on, because this is a near and dear to our heart. Establish a comprehensive firefighter cancer strategy that invests in research, provides access to screening for firefighters, and reduces and eliminates PFAS exposure, period. That's a biggie.
That is a biggie. And as you noticed, it is sort of multifaceted as well. So looking at, addressing firefighter cancer. Cancer is now the #1 killer of our firefighters who die each year. 75% of the firefighters that we call line of duty death now are attributed to cancer each year. And so that number is pretty substantial. So we've got to address our exposures, and PFAS is mentioned in the strategy, but we want to understand, yes, that must be eliminated, but that's that forever, chemical. It is something that is in our everyday life. It's also in our gear. It's an AFFF foam. It's in a lot of areas of our exposure. And so eliminating that is absolutely key, and having further development on our PPE. And we're down to just the moisture barrier. So the outer layer, the middle layer are both PFAS free capable right now. We have the fabric to do that, but the moisture barrier is still a problem. And so that is something we are looking to research to be able to rectify. I can tell you that the bill that was just passed has specific instructions in it for USFA and what we are supposed to be doing with EPA and NIOSH. So we are a sort of a tripartite government group that are supposed to be working the PFAS problem. And aside from that, the cancer issue, I will also tell you that PFAS is not the only carcinogen. And so it is important that we not put all our eggs in one basket because we are exposed to many, many other things that are also carcinogenic. If you haven't seen the IARC, the International Agency on Research for Cancer, deemed firefighting occupation as a carcinogen, not just the things we're exposed to, not a list of chemicals, the occupation itself is carcinogenic. Okay, so we have to understand that, if you start to look at it, you're like, okay, if you can get cancer, you can get PTSD, why would anyone want to do this job, right? So with this, we'll go back to our recruiting problem, but we have to start to think through, what does that mean? Well, is it also not just our gear, but understanding our exposures, understanding cleaning our gear, understanding showering, understanding all the things that science is telling us makes a difference. So it's not like we don't have any research on this. We have some, we need more, and we'll continue to facilitate that. The other thing you mentioned is screening, and we have to do better with cancer screening. Now, this is two-faceted. One is firefighters who don't have access to any screening because they don't have the appropriate health care. If they do have health care, it doesn't include screening for particular cancers, things like that. And then the other issue is there are some cancers for which there is no screening.
Right.
Pancreatic cancer is one of those. We find it, but you cannot yet be screened for it because there is no test. And so it's not like we look at prostate cancer, there's testing, right? We all look at, or males look at PSA levels. And so these are the kinds of things that this is sort of a multi-faceted strategy.
And
if I may, real quick, Nick, we were lucky to have the firefighter cancer support network on with us. And one of the things they brought up was the fact that they were finding that a lot of times as the occupation of a firefighter kind of put you in a position to brush off when anything was wrong with you. They mentioned that they were finding a lot of times that those in that position were not paying attention or listening to their bodies and then acknowledging that they did feel something. And that being another problem is this idea or this stereotype that they needed to basically buck up and just deal with certain things rather than acknowledge them. And I thought that was very poignant about making sure that it kind of delves into the mental health aspect of not being afraid to say when you feel something or that something might be off or getting something checked out.
Jamie, that's a great point. And I think that is absolutely spot on. We can't allow what we've had, the stigma with mental health forever, right? And we're just starting to overcome that stigma. It still exists, but we're starting to overcome it. We cannot have that play in continuously here. And I think you're spot on. I think it does. And so no one wants to be sick. No one wants to feel, because there's some kind of mentality that if I'm sick, I'm weak. And that is not the case, right? And so we need to look at this from a healthy perspective and a whole of well-being.
I get it, and I will tell you that when I watched the speech on the cancers, I don't want to say it was terrifying, but it woke you up. These guys, they're monitoring pump operators. They're recommending that the pump operator put something on their face, either just wear an air pack or put something on your face that's going to filter that. They looked at the incident command team. They looked at the aides. They looked at the safety officer. They looked at the pump operators, the aerial operators, PIOs, all these people. And they've been monitoring these people, and these people, they're building a case. And you know how that's going to go over, but they're building a case saying, if you're in this space, this even has public implications. Everybody likes coming and watching the fire. Pretty soon it's going to be, no, you don't want to, no, you need to go away. And then how are we going to protect, how are we going to protect those folks? That was a pretty enlightening portion of the program, was because again, there were multiple. It wasn't just one thing, it was multiple. And I'm glad you said the thing about PFAS. Everybody's all ratcheted up about PFAS. And then, listen, I was exposed, but luckily, I'm not like the Navy guys or an aircraft guy and et cetera like that. But listen, I've seen a lot more people get sick with other things. And the point that Jamie made about it's not me, it's that's just it's just an ache, it's just this, whatever, and they don't go for it. And I think the CDC and public health is going to be a partner with you in that too, right? With NIOSH, I think they're all in that game to try to figure it out. And again, you have we like the Cancer Support Network. They've done tremendous stuff, and we've done some stuff with them. We try to be supportive of them as much as possible. All right, I'm going to give you a quote from one of my favorite movies, and let's see who could see who knows what this is from. I wish my head could forget what my eyes have seen. Right? If you remember the documentary on Detroit, that's the pump bus, the operator, Dave Parnell, right? And when you in the next Detroit movie, it does a lot about what he talks about. So again, another thing we've talked about, which we think is when we've had some very close friends that we've lost because of suicide. Again, provide behavioral health resources and suicide prevention initiatives for all firefighters. Just so important.
Yep, and that is a huge one. So we do often in the fire service now, as I said, we're reducing the stigma. But one of the things I want us to continue, obviously, with the PTSD, assessing PTSD. Often we have the addictions, whether it's alcohol, drugs, or bad behavior, that is secondary actually to PTSD, right? So we're finding that often we're treating symptoms rather than getting to the cause. And so looking for that baseline cause, which often is PTSD in our realm of work. And then, of course, dealing with the continuing suicide issue. We have to continue to focus on those. But having said that, I want us also to begin to focus on the pre. It's hard for us to keep talking on the after, right? Once you've got PTSD and those who have attempted, and unfortunately those who have succeeded. But how about we deal too with the pre and doing some mental resilience building, just like we do resilience building with our wellness fitness initiatives, those sorts of things. We need to do some of that mentally as well. And we need to do it beginning in recruit school. It's got to start with our students. The Olympics does it. The NFL does it. The NBA does it. The Major League ball players do it. Why are we not building in mental resilience in our new firefighters and paramedics? Because that is going to be absolutely key. The military is doing it. The Army has a program called Ready and Resilient. It's available. You guys can look that up, Google it. Ready and Resilient, the Army. That program is incredible. And it's for all of the soldiers as well as their families, as well as their civilian employees. And it is an important piece that we understand. We have to build mental resilience because we have entire generations now that we, and I'm guilty, parents have protected. You've not let them get hurt. We've sheltered in many ways. They've not had bad things happen to them. If you don't have bad things happen to you, then you don't experience growing from those things and starting to learn that bad things can become opportunities rather than just being negatives, that you can grow and evolve as a human being and your emotional intelligence is developed and you mature even as leaders. But if we protect generations, and we have them growing up on technology and not having human interaction, and then we had COVID, right? These things do not lend themselves to resilience mentally. And so when they begin to see things living from virtual or augmented reality, actual reality, they don't process it mentally as well, right? So we have to pay attention to that and learn to focus on building some mental resilience right from recruit school and then carrying it throughout our careers.
And I'll jump on that board. Rewards come from hard work. Just saying, it kind of falls into that whole protection stuff, and we can get down that's a whole day conversation. Now we're going to go into something I really like and talk about is create safe communities by implementing and enforcing code standards, especially in the WUI, and understand the vulnerable populations, providing affordable and by providing affordable and fire safe housing. This is right up. This is the 5 E's. This is getting ahead of it, building the engineering, building the enforcement, and if you fail and it doesn't work, you build a response.
You're right on. Absolutely right on. And so this one really does focus on the fire problem. And a lot of people, and I still cringe when I hear somebody say, oh, fires are down. I'm going to tell you, fires are not down in this
Oh,
country. And even though our data, everybody says, oh, the data say, well, our data are pretty much worthless. The data in the info system, yes, it's there. And yes, it's all we have right now. But I'm going to tell you, across this country, we've had, unfortunately, we've made it so complex and we band-aided a bad data system for a very long time that we now have, it's almost overwhelming to try to put data in on a fire. When you have to sit there and just make sure, you know, firefighters will sit there and make sure they're entering data. Please don't let that light turn red, or please don't open another window, right? So they're very careful about it. And so consequently, we don't get the fire module filled out. And we have data that appear that fires are down because we're not actually recording all the fires. And so we've seen this. I've studied it in every department. We know that it's happening. And so fires are not down in this country. In fact, they're just the opposite. They're up. And our deaths from fires, even though we have percentage wise, and if we look for, you know, spans of years, yes, fires are down from, you know, 50, 60, 100 years ago, but our deaths percentage wise are increasing again.
yeah.
And what does that mean? That means that we have less focus on our vulnerable populations, because a lot of the people, 2/3, in fact, of the people who are dying are people of color, poor, and a huge percentage of children and elderly.
Yep.
And so we have to pay attention to our public housing. We know there's a little over 500,000 public housing buildings in this country that HUD tells us are still in inventory that have not yet been retrofitted because they were built before the 1992 Fire Safety Act. And so we have to be cognizant of these kinds of structures that still exist in many of our cities and the population who lives there. And one of the things that we say often is that public safety, or let me say it another way, safe and affordable housing should not be mutually exclusive. If I try to make housing safe, it should not now price it out of the range of people who can afford to live there. And so these are things that we are watching, and that often the builders will tell us, oh no, it's going to cost X, and it will now have to, you know, we have to charge more. And we know that that's not in fact what the research shows. And so we really need to continue to focus on the fact that America is still burning. And that's not just the structural environment. We've already talked about the interface. As you just said, it's easier to say interface than WUI, by the way.
It is.
So there you go. So just call it the interface, and we'll extrapolate from there. But we do have a fire problem, and codes and standards are going to be an absolute must-have. We need better direction from the federal government on this. We need better dissemination to the states, and we need more consistent implementation all the way down to the local levels, and then heavy authority to enforce. And so these are things we've got to focus on.
One of our bread and butter operations for studies are small community fire departments. A lot of times we're in commonwealths, so there may not be a fire marshal even allowed. The fire marshal comes out of the state. And so there's a lot of, well, who looks at this? If you have this problem, who do you call? I called it. Why, you know, it really didn't make. Here's a couple key points. So our friends from UL have proven that you have less time. If you don't have a sprinkler system, doesn't matter if you have a smoke detector, because it's not about the smoke detector. It's about the movement and the thermodynamics. You have less time to get out of your house right now than you've ever had in history. Ever had in history.
Which means your chance of dying is greater.
And
right?
we've had, and the study, another study, again, I'm telling you, you got to download this QR code and just watch the whole thing. The second part to that is there are more people dying as a result of fires. Now, sometimes they get, you know, they go to the hospital, because this actually happened to me. They go to the hospital and they go home, and then they get pneumonia, and then they go back to the hospital a month later, and they don't tie it back to the fire. They tie it that the 78-year-old guy, they counted it as pneumonia, right? They didn't tie it in together. So again, the numbers are still up there, and the numbers are still going up. It is sad though, that it's a good thing and a bad thing. We take the COVID numbers out. The good news is we were tracking down on line of duty deaths, right? The very upsetting part is more firefighters die by their own hand than by something, even their heart giving out or other medical problems, right? It's just, it just kills you. All right, I'm going to read the next one, and I don't understand it, so I need your help. All right, so I think I know what it means. So elevate the fire service in federal policy development to an equal basis with law enforcement. And you guys changed this. Actually started with a strategy, right? Was changed during the summit to from endure to elevate. And I don't understand what's that. Is that like the cops and us getting support when law enforcement gets support, or something else?
No, that's exact. Well, I'm gonna put it a different way. So even I'll tell you, I said that USFA sits inside FEMA, right? And FEMA sits inside Homeland Security. Well, what you may not know or remember is that FEMA used to be, or USFA used to be equal to FEMA. All right, we were on the same level as FEMA, right? And then when Homeland Security was formed is when we were reduced and put inside FEMA, though we're not a response organization, nor are we a disaster organization. We're put inside FEMA, inside Homeland Security. Every other component inside Homeland Security is a law enforcement component. Across, in fact, law enforcement, the DOJ is all law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
They have their own cabinet position, their own, and then across government, there are other law enforcement agencies throughout federal government. We are the only true fire organization, even though you have firefighters in DOD, you have firefighters in DOI, you have firefighters in ag, you have, NIST, who has a fire lab, you have ATF, who does some arson investigation, and yet we're the only, all of that together is less than 10% of the firefighters in the country. All the rest of them are represented by USFA, and yet we're one little piece inside FEMA. And so that's what that was talking about. It is, how can we elevate the whole of the fire service when we can't even draw together and have a single entity, or at least recognize the fire components across federal government? And so this is more outside a USFA led effort. So this is that sixth strategy that is going to be dependent on that fire service one voice.
I got you. Because again, you guys got knocked down. You were able to be up here on you were at the adult table.
We're working our way back.
All right, so we do have a question.
Yep.
You want to do the lithium, Jamie, if you don't mind.
So Jeff asks, has the USFA had any input or focus on the rise in lithium ion battery fires? He says that he knows many organizations seem to be working on this, but he'd like to hear your feedback on the current problem. They just responded to one a few hours ago in a college dormitory. Oh,
wow. Yes. So yes, we have several pieces of messaging, but we are messaging based on the work that UL and FDNY have been doing. So we're not about reinventing the wheel when there's research efforts already underway. We are having those conversations and pulling people together so that, again, that one voice comes together and we all focus on one problem. That is being done in a new effort that we have called the Fire and Life Safety Communicators Initiative, where all fire and life safety communicators have come together to make sure we're translating research into practice and research into safety messaging to the public. And that we're not just talking to ourselves, because firefighters cannot change this. This is down to the public behavior, human behavior, and how we treat this technology. And so we are leveraging that. We are very well aware. We're very much in the circle of the lithium-ion battery discussion. But here's one of our biggest efforts right now, because you said you just had a fire, whoever asked the question, you can't even enter that into the data system because there's nowhere for you to put it was a lithium-ion battery, right? this is what I'm talking about. It all goes back to data. And I think that's our role with our national data system, is that we accurately document these kinds of cause and origins of fires so that we can have then the data to be able to make change. How do I get rules and regulations without appropriate data? Right now, FDNY is reporting. Right now, we've got heavy research over at UL, Fire Safety Research Institute, right? And this is what is going to help us inform policy. But if we can't track these cases, then you don't have the leverage to change regulation. So we are very much in the midst of all of this conversation, but again, all with one voice.
All right, folks, we have like 7 minutes left. What I'd like to do is if someone has a question, unless Jamie, do you have anything stacked?
I do not. I just Jeff also had commented on the reporting, which you just touched on. But I did have Pete just wanted to let you know that his students arranged to share the broadcast of Springfield and the area fire stations. So thank you for doing that. And sorry, I just lost it. We also had the University of New Haven shared that as well tonight. So thank you very much, guys.
Very good. All right, here's your, who's got a question? Here's your shot.
If any of those students are listening, I'd love to hear maybe if Gen Z has any opinions on the recruitment issues.
Absolutely.
If anybody'd like to add in a question, they can feel free to unmute themselves.
Either unmute themselves and call it out or send it to
or you can
Jamie.
put it right in the chat.
It looks like Dave. I see a Dave with a hand up.
Whoop.
Dave, you got a question?
I don't have him on my screen, so go ahead, Dave.
But I don't know that he has audio.
I think he unmuted himself, but I don't hear anything. He did put in the chat, thank you very much for speaking tonight. Thank you for acknowledging that suicide is the #1 non-natural cause of death for firefighters.
It's just never thought, 45 years ago, I never in my wildest dream thought that that would be a topic of conversation at the national level. Just crazy.
It's unfortunate, but we can change this trajectory. We have to be alert. We have to be bold enough to ask. Right. I know that those conversations are not comfortable, but this is one of those spaces that we all have to become comfortable being uncomfortable. In fact, I used that with my staff today about a different issue. This is one of those spaces, not a comfortable conversation, but care enough to be comfortable being uncomfortable and ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Because if you can starkly ask someone, you can jar them into thinking another way, right? Or at least you can know so you can intervene. So these are the kinds of things that when you have a gut feeling, trust your gut and care enough to ask. And don't just say, oh, this can't be happening, right? We have to be bold in this area and take care of each other, take care of our own.
Absolutely. Well said. Looks like we've got one last question. Dave wrote it in. He says that, is there a way to end, he said, we've made great strides in reducing discrimination based on gender, race, and height. Is there a way to end age-based discrimination in fire service?
Yeah, no.
I wasn't aware that was going on.
He says that in some states ban career firefighters past age 35. Dave, is that the state of New Jersey? I'm not sure which state that is.
Might be.
They ban hiring them, I'm assuming is what.
Yeah.
Past age
You
35.
can't get a job in the federal system, I think, after age 30. I gotta tell you though, I don't want to be the kid that I was 40 years ago. Not right now. I'm not built for it. I'm not set up for it. I do have.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say at the end of the day, we want, obviously to talk about people, all people, whether they're, green and purple polka dot and, whatever age, that they can do the job. And I think that is, having good mental capacity and faculties as well as physical, physical ability.
So once again, the superintendent of the National Fire Academy is reaching out and asking if there's anything you'd like to see, any program you would like to see at the National Fire Academy, drop them a line. the very good meeting today. Lots of stuff on the burner. Cool stuff coming in multiple different forms. But if you have an idea, go ahead and send it to them.
And I'm going to say, this is what Superintendent Gablix would say to you. This is your National Fire Academy. And
Right.
so we do want to hear from you
Right.
and what you want to see, because we are changing the face. And I've told Eric, if there are classes that we've got, only a very few people signing up, maybe it's time to stop teaching those. Let's put in the ones that are got waiting list, right? Let's do more. So we really want to meet the needs of the fire service. So let us know what do you need? We want to be agile and we want to be effective for the fire service.
And we had that very conversation today. Several instructors said, where are we on this? Where are we on that? In some cases, there were developed excellent programs by other people that get funded by the same folks as the National Fire Academy. And he offered to connect them up. And another thing is that it's in the burner, it's in the burner, it's in the burner. So and the place is changing. And we saw that with some of our past guests. It's had to change before and it has to change. It's changing now. So that's wonderful. Listen, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I mean, this has got to be outside the normal federal plan for executives to spend, an hour with a bunch of folks from all over the state and all over the place now. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for explaining everything. I think it's robust. I think it's exciting. I think there are several, I know I can see several movers and shakers that are still here, and there's other ones that were here before that would be happy to help out and jump in on any of those things. Oh, before I forget, I almost forgot because I would get in trouble. So on April 14th and 15th at the National Fire Academy, the Executive Fire Officer and Leader Symposium is going on. We announced this last month. We wanted to make sure we announced it tonight. Don't get reimbursed for training. However, while you're there, they'll put you up and in one of their deluxe accommodations. You will need to pick up the food tab for the 2 days, but I've seen the list of who's coming and who's talking. I'm going, you need to be there. These are the people that are on the edge and taking us to where we're going, similar to some of the stuff from the summit. So it is April 14th and 15th. It's a Friday, Saturday. All right. Again, transportation's on you or your department, and food is on you. Lodging's on the Fire Academy. It's going to be a great 2 days. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for listening in. And we welcome your feedback. Reach out to us. So thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you.
That's what we do. Thank you, guys.